All right, good afternoon, residents of Everett. Welcome to the Everett City Council's Parks and Quality of Life Council Committee. I'm here, soon to be with co-chair Paula Ryan, Councilmember Liz Vogley, Jennifer Gregerson, Yorick Stevens-Wajda, and Becky Abelman-McClary.
Yep. Thank you.
My first quiz of the day passed. The public is welcome to attend this meeting in person or remotely. We won't be taking public comment during the committee meeting, but of course we take public comment during every council meeting, which will follow this meeting this afternoon at 6:30. To watch remotely, you can call in or listen to the meeting by dialing 425-616-3920. The conference ID is 724-88726, or you can view this on YouTube on the City of Everett channel. So we have two main agenda items for today's meeting. The first one is a implementation update of the Climate Action Plan. And though there is a full slide set on this, Jennifer, would you like to do a couple of highlights, what you think are the main points to understand?
Yeah, definitely. So as I'm sure you remember, we adopted the Climate Action Plan in 2020. And I think this is probably the first implementation update, but I don't totally know. That seems about right for the years that have passed between 2020 and 2023. So I have the progress report. It's not quite released to the public yet, but it will be. We wanted to give you guys the first kind of preview of it. This really focuses on our achievements, and I just like a couple highlights of things that I thought were notable. We have a good, let's see, oh, yeah, we have a web presence for this. So on this governance page, so this, I guess this works, yeah. Online resource that kind of references the elements of the, well, perhaps not through this interface, but it's on page 3 of the report once release it and you guys have it. So there's a nice web presence. We've started to implement some bike projects. The fleet electrification, both with transit and then maybe kind of more of a more timely news. We're working on a partnership with the PUD to look at a 10-year plan. So they have they're funding, I guess, a project where we can work with effectively for free a consultant who helps develop this 10-year plan to electrify our entire or close to entire fleet. So we just have started some conversations with them. So that's kind of mentioned here, but certainly the transit work that you guys have done, which is really great. Really great work. Really proud of that. We've done some great energy conservation at our water pollution control facility and the water filtration plant, which are described kind of in some good technical detail here on, yeah, and that electrification section that talks about the work that they did there with energy conservation. Of course, you guys know that we have always been supportive of some of our, green and high-tech businesses, so Helion, TerraPower, InFarm, businesses like that. Our stormwater division continues to do good work around our infrastructure and then education programs too, so for individual homeowners on things that they can do to be good stewards of our watersheds. We have a great program which is somewhat unique among other cities with our solid waste handling and recycling of materials. So for instance, you're reusing wood chips for landscaping and, other ways that they can reuse materials that come through Public Works and through our solid waste facility. Not necessarily like flipping through the whole report, but maybe I'll go kind of to the table of contents for the rest of this. Thinking of the green economy as well. So always support our farmers market and local ag support. And then things that there are other folks at this table know a lot about, that's kind of compact multimodal land use. So our work to ensure we have housing near jobs and transit and increasing density in the community. So those are kind of high points about what's in the implementation update. And if you have feedback about what was in the document or questions, I'd be happy to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, I guess one comment I'd make from, as a summary of that, is that there really are concrete actions going on. This isn't one of those plans that sits in a file cabinet, and I'm happy to see that. We'd heard about the award that Everett Transit had gotten for electrifying buses, and And then, of course, outside the scope of the city's actions here, the work going on with Sound Transit in the Southwest Industrial Area, that 35,000 or so manufacturing employees there will have a chance longer term to get a lot of them out of their cars. So one of the largest levers we have on vehicle delays and fuel use and greenhouse gases, that it's longer term and it's outside the city's sole purview, but that's great opportunities there. Did we have some additional comments?
Since you brought up Sound Transit, there's a lot going on with that, obviously. And I'm thinking, these are great bullet points, but it's kind of like what we've been doing, so nothing really new is on this list besides the PUD just getting started with conversations about electrification of our vehicles at the city. So I guess I want to put in, I mean, Boeing folks likely aren't going to get out of their cars anytime soon, but unless we help all of our residents. And so, with lowering parking standards, lowering the amount of parking and off-street parking, I know we talked about that at other meetings, and getting actual viable transit, because even talking in the interim in between AHA meetings, learning about who rides the bus, what types of people ride the bus, and it's not usually those who care a lot about the climate. It's those who don't have cars, can't afford to drive, all of those things. So real, actual transit-oriented development, I hope to see implemented and worked on at length.
That's a good part of that, kind of our next item about comprehensive plan and that vision for the city, and, yeah.
Thanks.
Councilmember Ryan.
Great. Good evening, everybody. For my apologies if I missed it. One of the suggestions that I had during one of the monthly meetings with the mayor was thinking ahead to the styrofoam ban that's going to be coming online June 2024, I believe. And so just having systems in place to encourage composting, especially at our festivals downtown and farmers markets, a great spot for that. And just other receptacle needs or staffing or whatever's involved with just in shifting from styrofoam to more compost-based containers. That's
Right.
the word I'm going
Yeah.
for. So I'm not sure if that had been something that had been passed along since I mentioned it about 4 or 5 months ago. So wanted to reiterate that to make sure that I think it ended up, there may need to be a conversation with Cedar Grove / Rupertino to chat with them about like the actual physical containers and then capacity with staff to move them to where they need to go and the logistical part of it all. But yeah, I would love to see a pretty significant effort towards having the systems in place long before June 2024, which I guess is about a year out now. Because I think every time I touch styrofoam, I'm like, oh.
It is always kind of crazy to run into it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and when you think about, when I think about where Councilmember. When I think about where I come in contact with it, it's always at businesses that are probably like slim profit margins, like family-owned restaurant that probably isn't really ready to try to source a whole new, method, and so kind of support for that. So that where that intersects with our economic development folks, and yeah.
Yeah, Sonic, the new one down there.
Yeah.
I was surprised to get my drink in a styrofoam cup.
Oh, wow.
So, not sure what their profit margin is.
No, that's maybe like a throwback kind of message there.
Yeah. another thing that I forgot and now I remember, I know that we're talking about tree canopy. I don't know if you know a whole lot about it. I know Bob Leonard does. Do you have an update on that? And the tree, not necessarily an update, because that's not what we're expecting of you right here, right now, but,
Thank you.
and he's not here, and I'm not sure if the other two.
But it might relate more to the agenda item two in terms of the comprehensive plan. Oh, sorry, should have that on. That might relate more to agenda item, our next one on the comprehensive plan's climate change element.
Does it?
Yeah,
York?
there's some like right-of-way things that are happening
Yeah.
too.
We have a grant, right, to get a lot of things
Yes.
going?
So the pros plan had a tree canopy assessment, so we have that
Yeah.
data. We have the DNR grant to grow that, get that tree keeper software, and that sort of helps with that public communication, and also kind of help identify like what is needed. Focused mostly on park trees, but there's a possibility that that could expand beyond that. We're currently in the midst, like, I don't know, I think it's this month really, joining with Sonoma Conservation District to apply for a USDA grant. Some of that's focused on some specific communities that, like urban heat island communities that are, no surprise where those are, so like south end of the city. And
There's an ARPA allocation too for the
Yeah.
tree study and,
okay, yeah.
300,000.
And
So-
I think there were some trees in North Everett, some very old trees that were sort of reaching the end of their life, were going to be replaced by some newer ones, which will temporarily be less canopy, but long-term.
Yeah. So I don't know, the short update of what I have in my head about it is, working on this urban forest management plan. And so that's kind of what provides that framework to plan that out. And then kind of look at next steps. So those aren't just fake words, those are real things that I got out of a meeting and what I took away from it. I don't want them to sound like I'm babbling around it. Look, that's legitimate stuff that's happening. I don't have more beyond that. And then it is part of one of the mayoral directives to, that it's an important initiative, so, yeah.
Two things to add on to tree stuff. One is a nod to what Councilmember Zarlingo was mentioning. Part of that tree study with the older trees is to identify legacy trees and historic trees. And so the app that's going to be available, people can share like, I grew up in Everett and I used to climb this tree and, now the grandkids are, so they can identify like heritage trees and legacy trees, and there's different categories for different types of trees that can be designated. So it's sort of like the way that you give a home or a building a historic designation, but it's specifically for trees. So that'll be neat when it comes online.
Cool.
Number two, I guess it's kind of a spoiler alert, but it feels like a really appropriate time to talk about it. In my next one-on-one with the mayor, I'll be asking the city to make a formal decision on the Wood Creek forest area. I know that the neighborhood's been in limbo for like 3 years now, and so it'd be great to get a final answer on whether the space will be preserved, whether it will be not preserved, whether it will be used for carbon offsets. There were some really great suggestions that Forterra had come up with 2 years ago at this point that has just sort of lingered, and so I think the neighborhood's really feeling a bit behind and a little bit left out on what's next and worried, so it'd be great if there could be a formal decision made.
Noted.
Thanks.
And I have one more that I just remembered. Again, with the memory. And this might also be for York and Becky, but landscaping outside of buildings. I know that like bushes and stuff don't necessarily help the climate, but neither does barren land. And I think I was reading or speaking with somebody about, well, I noticed that a lot like Fluke is the big one that I remember. And sorry, am I not supposed to say names of businesses out loud? There are some businesses that I drive by in my car using carbon. And I've noticed that instead of just cleaning up, they are just taking out their plants and shrubberies, and maybe even trees. So I think there's a code about that, and I'm wondering how, I don't know, I just wanted to bring it up. I don't know where it goes, but this is quality of life, and it is ugly. So, yeah, just a notice.
Yeah, just to respond to that particular, not to the site, but in general, we have landscaping regulations on new development, and when landscaping is required as a condition of that development, it must remain. And if it is removed or altered without permission, such as cutting down the street tree and not replacing it, that could be a code enforcement issue. And if that's something noticed, that's something that we could take a look at. I know it's something that we had our previous land use planning manager had an encyclopedic memory of landscaping plans and would notice. I know some retail and gas stations and stuff like the visibility into there, and so you can see them topping the trees and stuff, and he would go catch them.
Thanks.
I'd like to concur with that and share that, yeah, the barren parking lots are unwelcoming and they are an eyesore. I can think of like 3 along Evergreen just off the top of my head that are always empty. Like the stores are maybe struggling a bit, and at one time they had hopes that they would have full spots, but it's just this blacktop that, and in summer you can just feel the heat emanating from it. So I don't know if there is an opportunity for helping those business owners tear some of that up to put in trees, or if there's a requirement that if a parking lot's underutilized for a certain amount of time, for a certain percentage of vehicles or something, then it needs to be restored back to its original earthly purpose. But that might be more of a, I don't know if that fits in the comp plan better than just some sort of a requirement.
That could fit in the comp plan as an action and a policy for us to develop a program around it. It's not something that we currently have, and it's a lot easier to regulate development and require as a condition of development some changes. So generally, things that are there are allowed to remain, but there could be some incentive, or maybe there's a connection to stormwater fees or charges or something that are linked to the amount of impervious surface, and the more that you have rain gardens and landscaping and all that might reduce that. So just the existing system that we have could be an incentive, but we can take a look at other options, and the comprehensive plan will have a space for a set of actions for us to implement in the 5 and 10 years after the plan is adopted.
Great, thank you.
All right, well, that looks like that's for agenda number 1. Our second item is the climate change element of our comprehensive plan, which we're underway on right now. And Yorick, I think you've created some slides and graphics on this. Take it away.
I cannot help when I come to this table but to bring documents with me. There is so much to read and so much to share. So what I'm sharing today are our existing climate change and sustainability element of our comprehensive plan, the climate change section of Vision 2050, which is the multi-county planning policies that our comprehensive plan must be consistent with, the mayoral directive to staff regarding climate change, and a one-pager that is some graphics out of the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency strategic plan, I believe it is, and that have an inventory of the regions. This is King Pierce, Snohomish County region, 3-county region, greenhouse gas emission sources, and then for the portion of that that is attributable to transportation, you can see the wedge analysis, which is the plan for reducing the emissions from the transportation system out to 2050, consistent with the state and regional goals, and which which measures, which actions and strategies lead to what proportion of those reductions. I did not print out because it is 50-some pages, and I think in a previous item with the whole council, we talked over the 2023 legislative session. And there was a bill, 1181, that was the climate change bill that had actually been worked on by the legislature for 3 or 4 years, as any significant bill often does. Passed this year, parts of it take effect immediately. The main body of it with the climate change and resiliency element does not take effect until 2029. That is the date of the first progress report on implementation actions for the comprehensive plan. So the ones that I just mentioned, we'll have them in the plan. There was an emphasis on accountability in this cycle, and the legislature, I think this is where it came from, had noticed that there are frequently actions and plans and good ideas in comprehensive plans that may never make their way to fruition. And so there was a requirement for a mid-period check-in where you have to give a report to the Department of Commerce and perhaps the legislature as well on how you've implemented your actions. That date also happens to be the same date that a climate change and resiliency element must be included in the plan. We already have a climate change and sustainability element. We have a climate action plan, and between the two of those, I think a lot of this is already covered. If it's okay, I was going to run through the bill and then touch on a little bit of how our existing plan accomplishes some of those, and maybe some thoughts on where we go from here. And then I'd love to hear from you on what priorities you may have for our work over the coming year. The Growth Management Act includes 15 goals that are the fundamental goals that comprehensive planning throughout the state needs to work to. 2 of those, there was a new goal added with the climate change and resiliency, and then there was a change to the transportation goal. The transportation goal now reads, encourage efficient multimodal transportation systems that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and per capita vehicle miles traveled. There is in the citizen participation and coordination, there is a new focus on participation of vulnerable populations and overburdened communities. You'll see that as a thread running through this bill, sometimes termed as environmental justice, but both looking at the equitable distribution of benefits from addressing climate change, such as if you plant trees and parks, make sure that the distribution of the benefits around those are distributed equally and accrue to historically marginalized populations, and then the same thing for emissions reductions. Usually what goes along with greenhouse gas emissions are particulates and other unhealthy local air pollution things. So the more that we do to reduce greenhouse gases, it's positive for local health, and so there's a focus on making sure that those benefits are distributed equitably. The new goal around climate change and resiliency, ensure that comprehensive plans, development regulations, and regional policies, plans, and strategies adapt to and mitigate the effects of a changing climate, support reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and per capita vehicle miles traveled, prepare for climate impact scenarios, foster resiliency to climate impacts and natural hazards, protect and enhance environmental, economic, and human health and safety, and advance environmental justice. That's the fundamental goal that this bill and the climate element in our comprehensive plan must work towards, in addition to the other 14 goals in the Act. My read of this is that the goals take effect immediately, so we need to be planning to those goals, but the climate element and some of the specific requirements in there are due by that 2029. Not to say that if we can, we couldn't do much of that early. The requirements for the land use element add mention of green spaces and urban and community forests within the urban growth area. We talked about that just a moment ago. Special consideration to achieving environmental justice, including efforts to avoid creating or worsening environmental health disparities, and reducing per capita vehicle miles traveled within the jurisdiction. There's some about wildfires and including green infrastructure in the capital facilities plan, working closely with public entities that own capital facilities, so looking at probably our electrical providers, and for us, we own our own water and sewer system, but for other jurisdictions, they would need to work with those. And then a lot of text about the greenhouse gas and a climate change and resiliency element. The resiliency element can be combined with the natural hazard mitigation plan that is otherwise required, and we are just starting a work program on. Just having reread this today, that reminded me to check in with our natural hazard folks to see to what extent this project could cover some of the requirements in this bill as well.
Sorry, that would otherwise be things like major earthquakes, floods, landslides, that
Right.
sort of thing.
Yep, that's it. So making sure that I think flooding issues and heat exposure and sea level rise are probably three that might impact the city the most. I think heat winds up in a couple of these other ones as well. And then the last thing I'll mention about the climate and sustainability element is that the greenhouse gas emissions reduction sub-element must identify the actions that the city will take during the planning cycle. There will be guidelines coming out of the Department of Commerce, I believe it is, and so our actions must be consistent with that guidance, which will be released in a couple of years, and it will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions generated by transportation and land use, result in reductions in per capita vehicle miles traveled, and prioritize reductions that benefit overburdened communities. So many more details in there, but those are the general thrust of it, and you recognize a lot of the themes from some of the things that we've been mentioning in our climate action plan. They are very much the same themes that are in the multi-county planning policies. These are adopted, and the city is responsible for planning consistent with these as well. A couple highlights from that are reducing building energy use, electrifying the transportation system, reducing vehicle miles traveled, protecting and restoring natural resources like forests and wetlands, and urban tree canopy, and addressing impacts to vulnerable populations. So you can see a pretty consistent roadmap among the multiple documents. Folks must be talking to each other. And then in our comprehensive plan, you can see a couple of policies that implement, or at least include policy language to implement some of these things. We should inventory, and a lot of these were actually handled subsequent to the adoption of this element with the climate action plan. Inventory community-wide emissions, I believe that was done with the climate action plan process. Create incentives to encourage increased energy efficiency and use of sustainable building methods and materials. Promote adaptive reuse of existing buildings and retain existing buildings instead of building new ones. Support or provide incentives for electric vehicle charging stations. Require or provide incentives for installation of charging equipment. Amend the multifamily property tax exemption standards to require increased energy efficiency beyond standard building code requirements. And strengthen the non-residential energy code. Identify areas where urban heat island effects will be greatest and target those areas for additional tree planting. And identify disproportionate health impacts from climate change. So you can see how there's, again, some confluence with some of the requirements that were over there. Happy to take, yeah.
You can see me just waiting. I still am gonna say, even though I know it's already in the comprehensive plan, more electric cars aren't going to fix our car problem. And we're really needing, this is not you, you just make the policy go forward. But my council colleagues, we need to make sure that we're making it so cars are less viable. And the climate is in need of us to make some actual policy to prevent more of the devastation that is absolutely coming our way and is already here, considering we had hail. And it's the first day of summer, and, you know, hey, everybody, climate change is real. It's a quiet room. I'm feeling it. But all jokes aside, and considering, transit-oriented development and getting, like I said before, all of that moving around, I think it would be better with, of course, electrified buses and units, but there's so much talk about marginalized folks, right? Except when you put a bunch of people in one area and rely on cars, then there's that much more carbon and they're breathing it. And I know that it also says put trees where there's marginalization. You need the space, and then you also need to clean up the tree leaves and the roots that are going everywhere. And then, so I've got a whole lot of things going on in my head that I'm trying to get out loud on film for the rest of our lives. So I gotta get it out there, because at least 2 people are listening. And I'm sure
I'm
more.
listening, that's 3.
But gosh, it's, we have all of this paper or electronics, but still, way to go, planning folks, to get us thinking about this. How about that? Thanks.
Thank you for scheduling us.
Well, I had 2 things. I guess one of them is from my standpoint in terms of the cars and public transport. I think, as they say, it's much easier to ride the horse in the direction he's going, and I would probably I'd probably focus more on the complement of what Councilmember Vogel suggested in terms of making transit better and easier for a larger number of people, to reduce cars on the roads, because I think that's probably going to generate less difficulty and resistance, but we will both work on these things. The other question I had in terms of planning city and county, because the city's borders are pretty irregular, and certainly there are people I talk to who don't know if they're in the city or the county, and that was probably me at one time. You talked some about county efforts and state efforts and regional efforts. Are you comfortable that what we are doing in terms of these strategies are accounting for that city-county boundary and kind of coordination between those?
It's definitely something that, well, there are venues to work on that coordination. Puget Sound Regional Council, Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and Snohomish County tomorrow are the venues that we get together with the county, and just having it coordinated. Some of these are regional plans, and if we're all working off the same playbook, then we should be coordinated. I think it is worth highlighting that some of these are difficult decisions, and some of them can be costly to development or to business or otherwise, and you risk putting your city at a disadvantage if you're the only one that does it. So there's the whole thing of making sure that we're all arm in arm going together. So the venues are there to watch that, and that's something that we have in our minds.
Okay, because I know Snohomish County tomorrow, that meeting is tonight, as a matter of fact. And there is the possibility in the years to come, we will do annexation to rationalize some of those borders and probably bring into better alignment city development standards and densities and that sort of stuff into city areas, and have the county be something else. Councilmember Ryan.
Yes, for PSRC, I know they have like 83 different committees, which is there a specific one that works on these elements that we're talking about today? Is it maybe growth management, or I guess their transportation one would too.
Transportation Policy Board.
Yeah, I think the Growth Management Policy Board, PSRC has most of their work, much of their work is in the transportation realm, which also happens to be one of the major emitters of emissions. So the Transportation Policy Board would be the one to follow. Just adopted a regional transportation plan, and there was a major push towards the end of it to look at the interim greenhouse gas emission goals, and there's a 4-part reduction strategy: land use, demand management, electrification, and monitoring might be the 4th one, I think. Everything that I hear and I sit on the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency Advisory Council, is that every single tool is necessary, and you can see that with this wedge analysis. Federal CAFE standards are about a quarter of it. Mode shift that's associated with the work we do at a small scale here, walkable communities, as well as at a regional scale, just implementing the regional growth strategy so that most of the growth is in places that are transportation efficient, gets you that mode shift. And then looks like about another half of it is from zero emissions vehicles. That's one that there's a regional electric vehicle collaborative, the REV collaborative, that helps remember that Puget Sound Clean Air Agency and PSRC are, and the Department of Commerce, I think, are all partnering on, and they're trying to push out best practices and information to different jurisdictions. That's one where beyond the climate need, I hate guessing numbers. It was near, I'll get you the real number, it was near a quarter, it was a large proportion of new vehicle registrations in Washington State were electrical vehicles this year. And so combining the climate necessity with just serving the public with sufficient charging infrastructure is something that I worry about. There are grants out there, and there's support from the state and these other collaboratives, but
Electric.
I
Oh.
wanted to, sorry, thank you for that background. I think that's helping to emphasize the point that, my secret point that I was trying to make about how critical it is for consistent attendance by the city on these regional boards to make sure that we are having the collaborative approach with our neighboring jurisdictions. So just wanted to have that as a mention. Go ahead.
Sorry, I wasn't looking your way to see the red light. I've lost it. Yeah, I've lost it.
I have one of a kind of a intersection, no pun intended, on road stuff and tree stuff. So in conversations I've had with a colleague of mine, or friend, I guess, I have this vision of when light rail does show up here in like 2097, that it's lined with trees. And for that to be a requirement for sound transit, that has to be a part of the comprehensive plan as a requirement. So I would love to see that in there, and also possibly an expansion of that of some sort of like any new transit corridor, or however it could be phrased, or a requirement that any paving projects along like Evergreen or 5-2, some of those like larger roadways has to include an aggressive number of trees along the side. I think it helps with traffic calming, it helps with carbon offset, it helps with livability, delightfulness, if that's a measurable thing, quality of life, since we're here in that committee. So yeah, I'd love to see that included at some point, because I think as far as light rail goes, extra trees isn't gonna break the bottom line for sound transit by any means, but it will improve a lot of quality of life for just when we do finally get it here. So that's my mention.
If that's the end of our comments on those agenda items, then our last agenda item is kind of recursive. It's future agenda items. A list here, well, I'll go through them quickly. They were economic development, vacant storefronts in downtown, including zoning regulation, Downtown Neighborhood Association survey results, comprehensive plan, economic development strategy update, so that would be follow on to this kind of thing at some point, and Parks and Recreation open space update, same, and then the Parks Capital Improvement Projects updates. Do you have any comments, suggestions on the next of these?
As a suggestion, I'm not able to attend our July meeting. I know, sorry.
That's when we have vacant storefronts.
I know!
I mean, we don't have to, we
Yeah,
can
so
hold
I'm
it,
hoping we
but
can, I know I've been eager to discuss that and been a bit of a pest about it, so if we could either move it to August or something, that would be fantastic. I think it would be a great agenda item to also have the DEA to share their survey results at that same meeting, so I feel like they are very similar with each other. So yeah, if that could be moved to August, I would be grateful.
I will check, you know, vacationing, I don't want to make promises for them, but I would imagine if they're in town, that they'd be happy to shift out a month.
Great.
So,
And then for the meeting they'll be missing, I think the parks, anything parks related would be fine since I'm the Parks Board liaison, so I'd be up to date on that anyways.
Okay, so good possibilities are parks and maybe economic development if Dan Ernest would, if there's anything in particular he wanted to.
yeah,
Share
we
with
have
us.
the specific vacant storefront thing that I think Tyler in particular is planning to come to talk about, but there might be, broader economic development stuff I could.
That is the kind of
talk with them.
questions that I think we get
Yeah.
from our community members. Is there any particular recent updates?
Yeah, I think maybe an ARPA update with a lot of the economic development efforts.
Did you ask?
Yeah, I was just wondering if York and Becky got any information from us. I mean, I know, I saw you both taking notes, but we just ended abruptly with, so, did you get?
Yeah, I mean, if I took down some of the priorities and thoughts that you have, we'll work that into the ground floor. We'll have more conversations. We'll go element by element over the next 6 months, including land use elements, so think building energy and walkable communities, transportation element, design of the transportation system, and the climate element review as well. So we'll take these in turn and we'll bring the council along the whole way. And we will add delightfulness as a core measure of success for the plan.
You didn't mention this, but these folks are working pretty closely with Sound Transit, you know, sort of it's the model code partnership, but it's really looking at the Snohomish County and Linwood and Everett's regulations around the station development,
Yeah.
routing and station development, and from the comprehensive plan level, like the policy language that's in the comp plan, and then like as time goes on, down and kind of more into the weeds, and so that's good feedback for us to be thinking about in those conversations too, that I no longer attend but used to attend, so yeah.
Well, I think right now is about the time the Sound Transit Board and the System Expansion Committee are meeting to go forward with the choice of the stations and routes, the alignments to do the environmental impact statements on.
Right.
Tomorrow night,
Is it tomorrow night?
Tomorrow,
Okay,
or
'cause I know
tomorrow
it was
day, or
right about
whatever it
now.
is.
Okay.
I was just gonna make a comment about, York mentioned we're gonna be going to, bringing these elements forward, taking a look at what we might need to change. So we're gonna be at the Planning Commission probably sometime later this summer, and this will be one of the topics for that. And then we haven't quite, and I'm not sure if this is the right group, talked about how often the council wants to be updated versus the committees on these topics. So something you might want to,
For, sorry, Sound Transit?
no, for the comprehensive plan
Oh,
elements. As
right, okay.
we don't want to bring a package to you that you haven't seen along the way. So we want to keep everybody informed about what's developing. And so just something for you to talk about
Yeah,
and think about.
that dividing line between which things go to the full council and which start here, we are, as far as I know, still just feeling our way forward on that. And I think we do the best judgment calls we can at these meetings, and then if there's, and maybe when information is sent around, we can send around an agenda and a note to the full council saying, hey, if this is something you want to be briefed on and you're not part of that committee, if there's enough interest, then add that to one of the council meetings. That may be a way to handle it. Best way I can think of, but
I have a comment on something else. I just wanted to mention that there's now at least one more person in the, in my district, in District 4, that has moved in and rides his bike to Boeing and is very interested in parks and whatnot. So if one person reaches out, then more people exist. And I'm just so aware that it's can be quite scary to ride your bike to Boeing from South Everett. So just putting it in there again for planning safe bicycle routes. I know that we're doing good things, making good strides with bike routes and all of that. And, transit-only lanes, maybe on Everett Mall Way and Evergreen, taking them out and just making transit better. And making, so,
Well, and I think the initial work on, you're more familiar, Councilmember Ryan, than I am, but the early work on bikes on bicycle lanes has mostly been the main corridors, kind of the spines for this. And then the logical next step is which are the most viable, higher density corridors like, commute routes like what you're talking about.
and even going down the Fleming, I drove that finally. I know Fleming, but not College very well. Holy mackerel. I have an opinion. And if it was safe, I would much rather go down Evergreen because it's more of a straight shot. But,
Yes, and I know that's a consistent question because some of the straightest shots end up being the ones that people feel are the most risky because they're with cars on those straight
Yeah,
shots.
7
And some
lanes.
bicyclists have said, no, I'd rather be on these back streets because it's a little slower, but I don't have to worry so much and don't have to compete with the cars. I don't say I have an opinion. I haven't commuted by bike. I ride, but not that way.
My anecdotal comment is that my bike accident where totally rainy, hill, braking, turning, all at the same time, bad idea. There's a bike lane now on Madison, and I wouldn't have turned because I would have had a nice bike lane to get all the way up to Evergreen, cross it, and go get on the Swift because I was tired of the rain pelting my face.
yes.
I still did that, but it just with like some knees in bad shape and my head hit the ground, like it was a whole thing. But, I have a good helmet for that. It was fine. I got back on my bike eventually. But I don't really want to drive down or bike down the Madison Hill, but it makes me feel better seeing the bike lane that's there now. So,
Yes.
Yeah, very
Yes,
good.
and some congratulations to Public Works because there was contention there in terms of parking and traffic lanes and turn lanes in both Madison and, is it Beverly? Is the intersecting road?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the other end of it. I
So-
passed that on the interurban most days,
So
so.
they did what they could to work that out within the confines of a resurfacing, not a complete rework of that street. And given budgets and timing, that's the kind of stuff we're gonna have to look for, is do the
Yeah.
maximum we can, consistent with all the needs and the budget.
I'm definitely eager for an update on the bicycle master plan. I believe
Yeah.
since I was sworn in, I've heard 3 requests for it.
I
So
have it on a list.
So it'd be great if because I have a ton of questions and this isn't really the
I know
right
that
spot for
the
it, but-
TAC is constantly bringing that up as well. And so I believe they are, I'm not the one to give the update, but I believe they're working on it somewhat, sort of. They also talk about it a lot, and it definitely needs to be updated because it's from like 2010.
Yeah, and I think, and that would be more of a full council update instead of just our little delightful committee.
Yeah. I'm going to say it at 6:30 PM as part of my administrative update.
All
So
right.
that's why I was like, I read that today. And so anyways,
It's a
you'll hear it
thing.
again. Like, we are working on that update.
Thanks.
Well, I think if that's what we have,
That's what
be
we
back
got.
10 minutes or so and be back again here at 6:30. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Thank you.